When it comes to wild card preps, some of these items are good though for certain people. So this is not to say that all these are radical, these are nonsensical. It's just that for probably the average person, there's probably a better solution to the problem. The first wild card prep is a spare freezer. I can't tell you how many people I know that have an extra freezer, two extra freezers, even three or four extra freezers, and then the power goes out. And it doesn't go out just for a couple hours, it goes out for a few days. And that's a big problem because for some of these people, they have literally thousands of dollars of food that could go bad if they don't have an alternative energy source. And that's going to be wild card number 2. So in terms of renewable resources or just energy sources in general, a lot of people think that the holy grail is the gas generator. And it does make sense to have something like that if you live in more extreme northern areas, maybe like up in Alaska or in Canada, where you have in different parts periods of prolonged darkness and you can't use a solar system, or you may not be able to harvest enough wind, so you can't have a wind turbine. So there's just unique situations for different people in different areas. But for most of us that have choices, the gas generator is plagued with problems. It is not a long-term solution just because most people cannot store hundreds or thousands of gallons of fuel. Most generators do not have a lifespan that is really what you would think. They're actually quite limited on how long they actually can last. Some of these generators are nothing much more than like a lawnmower motor put into a different system to just generate energy. And then you have the whole problem of maintenance, which a lot of people don't know how to maintain their generators, and of course, gas storage. I mean, how much fuel can you really store efficiently? And are you rotating your fuel every 3, 6, or 9 months, depending on the type of fuel additives or stabilizers that you have in your fuel? And that's another thing. You know, you're constantly having to rotate your fuel, maintain your fuel, and store your fuel somewhere that's safe. And some people just don't have the space or the money for that. And so it may be better to go with a different solution, such as solar. And that's something that you're going to have to look at, especially if you have more than one freezer. Number 3, high frequency communications, also known as HF bands. And if you're an amateur radio operator, you know what I'm talking about. And HF is very different than VHF or UHF in that the sense that you can typically transmit quite a bit further on HF than a lot of the line of sight communications the higher you get up the frequency band. But with that being said, though, depending on what's going on with the sun, the solar cycles, you know, what time of the year it is, what time of the day it is, sometimes the performance can vary greatly. I mean, we're talking about just because of what's going on with the sun, your communications may drop off to only be able to be transmitted locally versus at other times of the day, maybe at night, for example, you may be able to reach out hundreds, if not thousands of miles. So you have to just be aware of that. And so I would advise you to get into amateur radio. I think it's a very good thing to get into. But the wild card here is that some people think that if you just get this equipment, you get the license, you'll be able to transmit and reach out to pretty much anyone you want, anytime you want. And that's just not true. Number 4, large supplies of disposable batteries. Now, years ago, I bought hundreds of batteries with only a shelf life of anywhere from 2 to 4 years. And I realized that that wasn't a good thing to do. Now, I used approximately half of them, but the other half pretty much expired. And so I don't do that anymore. I do rechargeable batteries, and I do things that are based off of a solar recharging kit. And so I would advise you to maybe look at that, renewables, because these disposable batteries can be just a money pit. Number 5, a dedicated bug out cabin. We hear about everybody bugging out and having a bug out location and a bug out house or a cabin or some type of getaway in the woods, a bunker. But what we don't really realize is how ridiculous this is for a lot of reasons. Just how, impractical. Most people are lucky just to pay their rent, much less have an alternative bug out location or a separate cabin. Let's just say this. If you have friends that live in different directions and family that lives in different directions from where you live, just put that on a map. And if you have to egress from your location because there's a threat, you might want to develop good relations with them so that you can go and maybe spend a day or two until the threat is not a threat anymore in your area. Or if you have a vacation, cottage or cabin by the lake somewhere, just use that. You don't need to go out and buy a dedicated special cabin just for a bug out. Number 6, burial cache systems. Now, I'm not against this, but I'm just going to tell you, though, that I've seen a lot of people forget where they bury their things or their burial cache system, their so-called, vault. I mean, they have a lot of words for them, but their tube or their pipe that they've modified, whatever it is that is being used as this cache. Some people use barrels or drums, whatever, that they leak or there's a compromise or someone finds it and steals it. I've seen and heard about pretty much everything when it comes to this. So, I'm a fan of having resources put in different locations. But when you bury stuff, just be really mindful to know the limitations of that container and make sure you know where you put it. Number 7, firearms that use uncommon calibers. If it's difficult to find your ammunition now, then how much more difficult is it going to be during a real emergency, a crisis? Stores may be closed. You may not have access to order anything online. And you may just not have any luck finding anyone to barter with because they may not want what you have or they just may not have what you want. So an easy solution is to standardize the firearms you have into calibers that are common in your area. And this is kind of an interesting topic, really, because just because you're in the United States of America or whatever country you are, sometimes different regions use different calibers a lot more than others. So it's good to kind of look into that. And sometimes you can just go to, your local gun store and just ask them, hey, what is the most popular, cartridge that you sell? And they'll probably be more than happy to help you. Number 8, a dedicated bug out vehicle. This kind of reminds me of the whole dedicated bug out cabin. Most people are lucky just to have a vehicle, one vehicle that is in working order. And to actually say that you need a dedicated special bug out vehicle, that's a wild card prep if you ever ask me of one. And I have to say, just use what you have. And I think that's what most people do, but you'd be surprised. A lot of people ask me, and you see a lot of videos on this, people are really getting into the concept of just building this special purpose off-road bug out vehicle. Now that's really cool and fun. If you just have the time and resources to do it, then do it. But by all means, it probably 99% of the time is not going to be practical on a lot of levels. Let's just take an example. You're at work, and all hell breaks loose and you need to bug out from work to your bug out location. Well, if you have a special dedicated bug out vehicle, that's probably going to be left at home, right? You're not going to have that at work. So you won't even have access to it. So let's just kind of use common sense. keeping all of your resources, in particular, especially all your savings, in gold and silver. Now, why would you want to do that? There's times that you need to have liquid assets during an emergency, and not everyone will even understand what the value of gold and silver is in whatever denominations that you have on your person. So it makes sense to diversify your assets, your emergency funds, everything, where you store it, different banks, and how you actually invest in it. You want to have some of it in cash, probably have some of it in stocks and bonds, some of it in precious metals, and so forth. You probably want to have a half a dozen or more different types of investments. But don't think that everything has to go into silver and gold. And lastly, number 10, you use an inch bag instead of a bug out bag. Now, an inch bag, obviously, for those who are new to preparedness, it just stands for I'm never coming home bag. It's more like a long-term survival bag, in contrast to a bug out bag, which is basically just something that's more short-term. It typically is anywhere from a 3 to 7 day bag. So for people who are just going to actually focus on all the long-term stuff and not the short-term stuff, I think that you can go a little overboard. And can you imagine carrying around an extra 20 pounds of stuff that you just don't need just because that's the only bag system that you have that's ready? So let's just kind of just use, once again, common sense. Sometimes you just don't need that much stuff to deal with common everyday emergencies. Hopefully this was helpful. I want to thank everyone for your ongoing support. Hit the like button if you like this kind of video, and you guys take care.